Today, we're digging into a company right at the center of the hydrogen revolution, Plug Power. It's a classic story of huge vision, huge ambition. But with any company like this, there's the story they want to tell you, and then there's the story the official paperwork tells you. So what we're going to do is look at both, using their own press releases and their annual report to see what's really going on. And real quick, gotta do the mandatory disclaimer. This is all just for educational purposes. It is not financial advice. Everything we're about to cover is public information you can find yourself. Okay, let's get into it. So here's our game plan. First, we'll look at Plug Power's big, exciting promise. Then, we're gonna open up what I call the investor's rulebook, the 10K filing. After that, we'll talk about the hurdles they mention inside, specifically around cash and parts. Then we'll put it all together, ambition versus reality, and finally, look at how they're trying to manage all that risk by going global. All right, so to get any company, you first have to understand the vision, right? The big story they're selling. And for Plug Power, that vision is massive. It's optimistic, and it's all about them leading the world into a new era of clean hydrogen. You can really feel that confidence in this quote from their CEO. Listen to the words: executing with discipline, driving margin improvement. It's all about positive forward motion. This is the kind of narrative you build to get people excited and to show you have a solid plan. And they've got some big numbers to back that up. Check it out. $710 million in revenue for 2025. But the really key thing they highlight is getting to a positive gross margin in the fourth quarter. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, in simple terms, it means that for that little window of time, it cost them less to make their stuff than they made from selling it. Hitting that positive mark is a huge signal they point to on their road to being profitable. And who are they selling to? I mean, this is where things get really, really compelling. We are talking about the heavy hitters: Amazon, Walmart, BMW. When you have a client list like this, it sends a super powerful message that your technology is the real deal. So that's the optimistic story: big growth, hitting key milestones, and a customer list that's second to none. So you've heard the big vision. It sounds pretty great, right? But now it's time to switch gears and open up that official rulebook for investors, the annual Form 10K. And, well, this is where the picture gets a lot more detailed. Now, if you've never heard of a 10K, don't worry. It's basically a mandatory report card that public companies have to file every year. And unlike a press release, it's a legal document. They have to give you a full, sober look at their business, their money, and, this is the important part, all the things that could go wrong. And this really shows you the difference. A press release? That's marketing. Its job is to make the company look as good as possible. A 10K? That's a legal disclosure. Its job is to tell you the unvarnished truth, the good and the bad. You really have to read both to get the whole story. Okay, so let's get to the heart of it. Let's crack open that rulebook and see what kind of hurdles Plug Power says it's facing. We're going to focus on two big ones: cash and the components they need to build their products. So after all that optimism and those big-name customers, what does the rulebook actually say? Well, the difference is pretty stark. The very first number that just leaps off the page is this one: a net loss of $1.7 billion in 2025. Whoa. So while that gross margin was positive for one quarter, when you factor in all the other costs for the whole year, like R&D and administrative stuff, the big picture is a major loss. It tells you that even with all that revenue, the company is still spending way more than it brings in. And here's where we get direct language from the 10K itself about what's called liquidity risk. That's basically the risk of running out of cash to pay the bills. The company flat out states it has a history of operating losses, a need to raise additional capital, and that they fully anticipate continuing to incur losses. And that last number, that accumulated deficit of $8.2 billion, that's the total of all losses added up since the company started. It really highlights the core challenge. They're burning through cash to fuel their growth. But the challenges aren't just about money. You could have all the cash in the world, but if you can't get the parts to build your product, you're stuck. And that brings us to the second major risk: the supply chain. Plug Power's tech depends on some pretty specific and pretty precious materials, things like platinum, titanium, and iridium. These aren't things you can just pick up at the corner store. They're finite resources, and most of the world's supply comes from just a handful of countries. That makes the company really vulnerable if prices spike or if politics get in the way of supply. And again, let's look at their own words from the filing. They straight up acknowledge supply chain constraints, a dependency on key suppliers, and the risk of volatile commodity prices. The bottom line here is that a big part of their success depends on things that are totally out of their control, like the global price and availability of these key metals. So let's take a step back. We've got these two competing stories, right? On one hand, you have the ambitious, exciting growth story, and on the other, you have the very real, very sobering financial and operational risks. So let's put them side by side to really see the challenge Plug Power is up against. This slide just lays it out perfectly. It really is a strategic tightrope. On the one side, the goal is massive scale, build giant factories, expand all over the world, just dominate the industry. But on the other side are those obstacles we just talked about, the history of burning cash, always needing more money, and being dependent on a tricky supply chain. Figuring out how to walk that tightrope is their entire challenge. So, when you're facing that kind of fundamental challenge, what do you do? What's the strategy? How do you grow like crazy without the risks just crushing you? Well, a key part of their answer involves partnerships around the world. And that's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it? When you're already burning through cash and your supply chain is fragile, how on earth do you afford the massive cost and complexity of building a global business? The answer is actually pretty simple in theory, even if it's hard to pull off. You don't do it alone. You find partners and you share the risk. And that is the core idea behind their big push into joint ventures for international growth. And the logic here makes a ton of sense. Why do a joint venture? Well, first, it gets your foot in the door in a new country. Second, and this is the big one, you get to split the massive cost of building new stuff. Third, your partner knows the local scene, the laws, the customers, and it all adds up to the fourth point. You reduce your own risk of spending a ton of money. And this isn't just an idea on a PowerPoint slide. You can see them actually doing it. They're targeting Europe and Australia with big projects. They've got the Hydrogeny joint venture in the US and the Acciona Plug joint venture in Spain. These partnerships are the proof that this is their real-world strategy for growing globally while trying to keep those huge financial risks in check. And that brings us to our final question for today. When you put the promise of the press release next to the paperwork of the 10K, you see the whole picture. They have a huge vision, incredible customers, and a clear strategy to handle risk using these partnerships. But those risks, the constant cash burn, the fragile supply chain, they're just as real. So the big question is this joint venture strategy the brilliant move that lets them walk that tightrope? Or does it just add another layer of complexity to a path that's already incredibly challenging? The answer to that is probably going to define their future. All right, that's what we've got for this explainer. If you found this breakdown helpful, do us a favor and hit like and subscribe for more deep dives. Thanks for tuning in.